Welcome to our Fantasy Artist Roundtable. We have three esteemed guests of considerable repute, and it would probably be best if they introduce themselves because they'll do it better than I would. My name is William Galaney, and our first contestant of sorts is Lauren Brown. Madam?
Hello, everybody. My name is Lauren Brown. I am currently an art director at Wizards of the Coast, working on Magic the Gathering, and I've had 13 years of experience between the games, animation, and tabletop industries, and also I've been a freelance illustrator for a very long time as well. I have a show actually with Eric Wilkerson called Painted in Color. It's a podcast for artists on YouTube, and we've been running that show for about 4 years now. Um, yeah, that's about me.
Great, thank you, madam. And next up will be Bruce Brenneise.
Hi, I'm Bruce Brenneise. I've been working professionally for about 8 or 9 years now as a fantasy freelance illustrator, and most well known, I suppose, for my work for Wizards of the Coast on Magic the Gathering, Dungeons and Dragons, as well as games like Slay the Spire and Numenera.
Okay, and last up is Eric.
Hi, my name is Eric Wilkerson. I am an illustrator and concept artist. I've been doing this professionally for about 24 years now, and working in everything from advertising to animation to children's books to anything that pays money and makes me happy. So that's what I do, and it allows me to stay home. So there's that part. Uh, so yeah.
Well, actually, Eric, I was going to end on you because my first question I wanted to talk with you specifically because the question that's been on the top of my head for this whole thing, um, especially for anyone else in the crowd here who is an aspiring artist, was inspired by you during one of your interviews or one of your discussions on Painted in Color, specifically that Venn diagram of what you do that pays and what you do that you enjoy. How often do they intersect, and how much can you squish them together? Like you,
Well,
mhm.
it intersects a lot. Um, if you do the thing that you're passionate about, sooner or later people are going to find you and want you to do that for them. Or you just go out there and you find the people that do the kind of thing that you are excited to paint or to create. Um, when it doesn't intersect like that, you basically kind of just treat the job like a just a 9 to 5 thing. It's work, it's boring, but it pays. You the goal is always to try to find the thing that you're passionate about so it doesn't feel like work. So,
Now, what's the ratio of time would you say dedicated to doing work for yourself versus doing work for contracts or clients?
oh man, it's probably like a 80/20, 80% client work, 20% personal work,
Mhm.
you know. It's just that that's the kind of hustle that a lot of us are on. Um, and if if that ratio were to change to like a 50/50 or to be that percentage were to be reversed, then you'd be in the fine art category where you are doing primarily your own personal work and hopefully it sells. That's a whole different kind of career path though. So as an illustrator, your job is to satisfy the needs of a client. And but the what's funny is that the personal work, your personal visions are typically what bring the clients to you in the first place.
Mm. They're the real portfolio headers.
Yeah, because there's a lot of people out there that think, well, let me create art that I think that the client might like to see. And then they abandon what they push down their own personal voice or what they are truly passionate about because they see that the client wants dragon art or whatever it might be, and they say, I have to be great at doing that, but they might
Mhm.
hate it. and you won't find dragons in my portfolio for a reason. So
Not a
you
dragon fan.
gotta
Well,
do the thing that you love.
I won't let Steve Najarin know. But
Well,
Lauren,
right, he's a prime example.
yeah,
He
he does what he
loves.
loves,
He
and
does what he loves.
it serves him
Yes.
very well. And I like to rag on him when he doesn't have a dragon. I'll little sketch in a dragon whenever he doesn't have one because he needs dragons.
Yeah, leave all the
Lauren,
dragons to him.
Yes.
Lauren Brown. So the same question, like, what is your ratio between professional work and personal work?
So, it's an interesting question because I work full time. However, I don't do art for my full-time job because I'm an art director. So, as an art director, I get to tell artists what I want from them. I create art briefs. I create the vision of like, okay, I want you to draw this character doing this thing in this situation, and the artist can apply their own style and take to that, which I really love because when I get to log off of work and go to my own computer, I get to focus on my own personal work. I used to take on a lot more freelance than I do now because I got really burned out on a long-term project. And it was things that I really enjoyed doing, but it didn't intersect for the duration because it was about 60 card illustrations that I had to do. After that, I was like, I think that I'm going to just focus on personal art for a while and let myself not be burned out anymore. So now, if you're just talking about my pure illustration, I'm going to say it's about 80% personal work and 20% client work. So it's the reverse of Eric's ratio, but I'm also not a full-time independent illustrator either. So it's going to be a different work balance for me. But for me, I don't produce art super frequently anymore because I only have so much capacity to have time in the day to do so. But when I can do personal art, it's usually for my personal series, and then I go to conventions and sell them, which is another source of income. If you're an illustrator wanting to focus on your personal art, you can take that to cons or shows and sell them for your audience. So in this case, your client is your audience, but it's also you're giving your audience what you kind of want to show them and put in front of them. It's always best if that art is something that you're very passionate about and very excited about because these like your audience can see how excited you are and will want to support you more as long as you find the appropriate target audience for your work. And that can be a whole challenge, and that's a whole other conversation too. But for me, about 80/20 personal to client work.
And speaking of finding your audience, Bruce,
Yeah.
you and your audience are in a bus together. So, what about your ratio?
I would say currently my ratio is probably 10% personal, 90% client. I wouldn't say that's where I really want it to be, and certainly like longer term, I'd like to flip that around. It's just I've been keeping pretty busy with work for mostly for Wizards, and most of my time is taken up with either that or going to conventions because I'm doing like 12 to 14 conventions a year, and a lot of that client work is specifically what's feeding into my conventions at the moment. It's the sort of stuff that a lot of people are wanting to buy as a print or a playmat or so on. So that's where it's at, but I'm definitely looking ahead to the next step being promoting some of my own work more, spending more time with my Patreon on the personal IP that I'm building, and working up to some illustrated books and world building that I want to do.
Okay. Well, we're gonna have to follow up on the IP. So my next question was, I figured in this median, a lot of people might only be listening, to which I apologize, but I wanted to show one piece that I feel is iconic from each of you and just talk about it, if that's acceptable. Let's see here. So, I think Lauren, you probably recognize this one.
I knew this was going to be the one. I was like, as soon as you said iconic, I was like, yeah, it's going to be the
Yeah,
mushroom queen.
the spore crown queen
Crown
is
queen.
up in my mother's workroom above her loom, framed. It looks fantastic. This was the first piece of yours I saw. In fact, I don't think we had met, and I saw this, and I came over and pestered you, because it was initially at Gen Con.
Yeah.
So, what makes this piece encapsulate? Because I've noticed that. Well, you know what? I'll let you explain it. What made this piece distinct, and then how did it change afterwards? How you approached your personal art?
So this piece actually has a story behind it. When I got accepted into Gen Con 2019, I it was my first time ever it's my first time ever getting accepted into that kind of convention where it's a massive convention where fantasy artists with careers of 20 plus years tend to frequent. And then there's me, who I didn't really think super highly of myself or my art at the time. And I was so anxious and nervous about showing my art next to all these established fantasy artists that I stressed myself out and didn't create really anything new that year because I just had decision paralysis. I didn't know what they wanted from me. And then eventually I realized that they accepted me because I didn't lie to them. I made my art. They accepted my art into the show. They accepted me into the show. And what I decided to do was make a piece that was the most indicative of the inside of my brain, like what my world looks like. I put it on paper. And that was this piece where it was all the things that I was interested in, all the things that I loved, which is strong Black female characters in a position that you don't often see strong Black female characters in a fantasy setting as a goddess, as a queen, with clothes made out of nature, because I have a huge fashion inspiration from my father, who used to be a fashion designer, and just like with the Art Nouveau aesthetic, lots of movement. I'm obsessed with mushrooms and all its shapes and sizes. It's just fascinating to me. And when I debuted this piece at Gen Con, it was easily my best-selling print,
Hmm.
which goes to show if you carve out the inside of your brain and put it on paper, people might like it. And that was really indicative of like my exact body of work that I wanted to pursue. So this piece kickstarted a series, jump-started a series that I call the Avant Garden, which is a bunch of different queens that represent different walks of life. So it's like you choose to identify with whichever queen you want to. They all mean different things, and this one is all about adapting in places where you wouldn't expect to adapt in, and thriving in places that people don't expect you to thrive in. So this piece means a lot to me, and it really changed the course of my independent illustration career that I've had, on the side of my full-time work. And so makes me really happy that it's gotten around so much and that people really appreciate it. And yeah, it really was proof to me that I just need to keep going because my ideas and my art are valid and appreciated. So it felt really good to do this piece.
Good, good. I love it. I
Yeah.
immediately was captivated by it. Great. Now I'm going to throw one up that is, well, it's moved around our house. It was also at Ginger's job. So, the Oba. A similar experience happened when I saw this at Eric's booth at AwesomeCon in DC. So, Eric, why did this particular piece stand out for you career-wise? How did it change your career?
Well, another long story that I will try to keep brief, but I I had always wanted to see people that look like me represented in science fiction, fantasy art, and publishing. And for most of my career, I wasn't seeing that from the luminaries, the Hugo Award, Chesley Award-winning, heroes of mine. And I thought, well, this person is not going to do it. This other person's not going to do it. I want to see it, but I'm too scared to paint it because I was always afraid that if I painted the kind of stuff that I wanted to see out there in the world, that it would somehow affect my ability to get work from a particular client that wasn't asking for imagery like this. Historically, there are very few representations of Black people in science fiction and fantasy publishing. And so just by default, artists just stay away from it, have stayed away from that kind of representation for generations. Um, so when I painted this, I had hit a slump in my career where work wasn't coming in. And I was on the verge of just transitioning out of illustration and trying to get a job like teaching K through 12 art school. I mean, like public school art. Uh, and I thought to myself, if this is going to be my swan song painting, if this is going to be the last thing that people see from me before I go teach, you know, middle school art, um, I'm going to go out painting something that I always wanted to see out in the world. And I did. I put everything into this piece, all that heart and love and emotion into one piece that I thought um, a couple people would see. And I put it out there in the world. Um, I think it was 2018, like February, something like that, 2018. But it happened to coincide with the release of Black Panther. So there was like a whole wave of people online, like hungry to see imagery like this. And the image went viral. So I had uh, my former agent contact me uh, about representing me later on in 2018. She had seen this image on Twitter, and I didn't have a Twitter account, so that's what let me know. Oh, this is being shared around. Um, so it turned into it went from being a slump where work wasn't coming in to now an agent showing this piece and other pieces of my work to companies like Disney and Scholastic, and literally overnight my career and my life changed because I was being contacted by Disney and all these different companies literally asking for the thing that I thought nobody wanted. And it's not that there weren't black illustrators out there painting us in illustration in this kind of representational art. There just weren't many doing it in science fiction. There are numerous children's book artists, numerous people doing stuff from editorial and concept art and video games, but um, not a handful that I can think of that do realist representational work like this in publishing for science fiction. So there was a short list of people that Disney was looking for, that Scholastic was looking for, that Random House, and all these different publishers, and it it changed my career overnight. So then I ended up doing a ton of work in middle grade in children's book publishing, which led to me winning my first Chesley Award um, and getting my first children's book. I mean, there's a number like the ripple effect. I'm still living in the ripple effect of this one image. The house I live in is because of this one image. It's crazy, and um, that I'm still talking about this piece. I like it's like
You're gonna
6
get
years
tired of it.
later, you know,
Yeah.
is a testament
Yeah.
to like that the power of painting what you love and hopefully those doors open and the universe says, all right, we're gonna move all these obstacles out of the way, come on through, just don't screw up. Do the thing you love. So the stuff that I do for Wizards of the Coast comes directly from them seeing the work that I was doing for Scholastic and Disney and finally having somebody say, okay, he's ready. Come on in. And after having shown my portfolio to Wizards for decades. So it's the ripple effect has been really cool. Um and I'm actively working on more pieces like this was meant to be a series. I thought that I was going to do a series of paintings like this uninterrupted because I would just be teaching public school. um I had worked out maybe a dozen images, like a whole theme of this, but I never got around to finishing or starting the next painting in the series until you got on me about it
Good. I was going to ask.
last month, and it's actually, I have a piece that is about 75% done,
Good.
sitting on my easel right now. I had started it back in 2019, transferred it to the board around January of 2020, and then book covers and magic cards, book covers and magic cards, and I just put that personal work off to the side and just forgot about it. So, yeah, dusting off the stuff that I was excited about now.
I can't wait to see it when you're done, or as close to done as art can be.
Yeah, exactly.
Good. Good. I'm glad to hear that. I'm glad to hear that. That last little, that sliver of 20%, I'm excited about. And lastly, Bruce. So let me bring up Bruce's. Bruce can probably guess which one
Is it that one?
I'm going to subject him to.
Or maybe it's that one.
Just move your head. Just move your head.
Yeah. Bruce, I saw this online and I proceeded to, not necessarily, stalking is more of a sinister word.
You aggressively befriended me.
Yes,
point.
yeah. I held him down and said, I love this. We're friends now. So, Bruce, how did this particular artwork change your career, aside from getting the prestige of knowing me?
Sure. So this one, I guess you could say, was maybe not like the first little inkling of a snowball of my career, but like just a short ways in, probably. This is Trail of the Dream Titans. It's for Numenera, for Monte Cook Games, and it was part of a series of pieces. They had commissioned me to do, I think it was like 4 or 5 pieces for their Numenera Kickstarter. They were kind of doing like a second edition kind of a thing, and they wanted marketing art for the Kickstarter. They didn't have any specific places in the book that it needed to be. I asked them if they needed anything specifically illustrated from the world that they had already partially created, like so many places that weren't visually illustrated yet. And they're like, no, just give us some weird alien places that you come up with. So I just had, kind of a blue sky moment where I got to be the concept artist and the illustrator and just come up with whatever cool ideas I wanted to pursue. So this is as close as freelance illustration ever gets to just being personal, straight up personal work. And that's probably my favorite aspect of working with Numenera and with Monte Cook Games, because when they commission me for stuff, it's usually just give us another Bruce Brenneise landscape. And so the faith in my vision, I guess my personal vision, is really, really striking and an honor. So this one, I just kind of had the germ of an idea. What if giant monuments were really just the shells of giant, like Lovecraftian monsters, elder gods or things of that nature that could just wake up and start walking away, maybe crack out of their shells eventually. So I pursued that idea, and the one piece of art directing feedback that I got was they didn't want it to be adversarial. They didn't want these giant creatures destroying the little village down at the bottom necessarily. They were hoping for something a little bit more where they're kind of working together in some sense. So these creatures wander around and they exude exotic chemicals that the towns downstream collect. And then as they wander off, the town has to pick up and move to a new location to gather this stuff. So they created a whole section of their book, an adventure module and a town location and everything, just based on the illustration. And that's fairly rare, I find, in this industry. Usually it's the other way around. They've got very specific things that clients want, and then they want you to visualize it for them. And in this case, it's just, okay, what kind of story can we create out of this? And I guess kind of like Eric was saying, everything else kind of has followed from these sorts of pieces. The rest of my career, I got pulled into Magic and D&D specifically because I had a lot of otherworldly alien landscapes for Numenera. And so when they needed some of those, they reached out to me. So it's all kind of grown from this point.
It is fun to open a Magic pack and find a land by you that I didn't know about. Although at this point, it's kind of like, oh, it's Bruce again.
I don't have that many. I've only been working with them since 2020, so it's not like a huge amount.
So I'm going to bounce back to Eric's piece real quick. And part of it is I enjoy getting lost on your individual pages. And this is actually something that even though I literally live with this artwork, I only started noticing now. So Eric, the crook of her mouth in the corner, what helped you settle on this facial expression?
That was the facial expression of the model.
Okay.
Um,
Now, did you direct her to have a certain expression or how she felt or?
Actually, no. So I didn't have a budget for model reference.
Mhm.
Back in 2005, I used to work for an animation studio in New York City, and well, we did TV commercial animatics, and we hired models for a lot of the storyboarding jobs that we would illustrate. So this the head reference is of a model used for a Frosted Flakes commercial that I worked on like 15, 20 years ago.
Okay.
And I don't know her name. My producer doesn't know her name because I even asked him after I painted this. I said, like, this piece is getting a lot of attention. I want to show this to the model. Do you still have her contact information? And he goes, Eric, that was 17 years ago. I'm like, all right. So there's a woman running around out there right now with a full head of hair that looks exactly like this that will never know that this painting is on t-shirts.
I don't know. I like to think that maybe one day she'll just turn around and see it.
Yeah, like why is my face on that shirt? Yeah, I
How
that would be
awesome would
pretty
that
cool.
be? How
Yeah.
awesome would that be for her?
But her eyes were looking in a different direction. So those are my wife's eyes,
Ah,
and um the the model's face, and then I just took the hair off in the photo of the from the photo reference. But I wanted her I forget the tribe offhand, but there's a tribe in Africa that has these neck
hmm.
rings where their necks are elongated. So I wanted that kind of vibe. So the gold trims going like wrapping around and the collar, all of that stuff is supposed to be symbolic of that. But then she's got this entire headdress that makes it more like a futuristic version of what a contemporary tribe would look like today. So um, there's all kinds of little glyphs and uh, tribal markings and the patterns and like the silk robes and all that stuff going on. Um, yeah, so just fun.
Fantastic. And we heard Bruce's backstory, Lauren, about his artwork. Um, I have questions about the Spore Queen. I would like to think she does not rule with an iron fist.
No, she does. She rules more with whimsy and trickery and magic. But if you want to like talk to like how I made the piece and like where it came from, I am basically the model for most of my pieces because it's the easiest thing to get photo reference from myself. And
Hmm.
so I tend to photograph myself from different lighting situations and different scenarios. So if you think some of my pieces look like me, it's because they are me. It's easier that way. But also the kind of person that I'm representing is a kind of person. Like I haven't seen myself in fantasy spaces, very similar to Eric. I remember frequently walking around the floor of Dragon Con at the art show and looking around at all the fantasy, beautiful art, like some fantastic art, feeling so inspired, but also just never seeing a face like mine represented in those spaces. And I had quickly come to the conclusion that if I wanted to see faces that look like mine, I'm going to have to draw them myself. And so I literally had to create faces that look like mine because I could ask friends, and sometimes I do ask friends to pose for me, but the majority of my pieces are just me doing the posing, me doing like the facial expression, and I can conceal my eyes and change features around every now and again. But it's very easy for me to just like, oh, I need a lighting cut across my face. I just go pose under a window that's in my house and and take a picture. But yeah, as far as the actual story of the Sporcon Queen. I'm still trying to figure that out. There is a world that she lives in, and because mushrooms are so associated with death and decay, the other queens are very wary of her because of what she represents. But she's also an essential part of nature, which is something that those themes I'm very, very interested in. I love themes of there's no good or evil in nature. It's just forces. It's just push and pull of inexorable things that we experience every single day. So, the personification that people put into, sharks or like, predator animals or things like mushrooms or even mold, all those things have a purpose. And my art kind of strives to bridge the gap between what it means to be human and what it means to be a person that lives in nature. And so, if my art can even subtly get people to start thinking a little deeper about that, then I've done my job properly. But yeah, she's my favorite because mushrooms are my favorite, and I love what they do. I love that they're edible. I love that they can be as toxic as all get out. I love that they do everything in between, and that they have a whole hidden world unto themselves. So that had to be the first queen of the series because of that.
Well, they're a very efficient organism.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I like how I never saw the death angle because she's completely lacking in morbidity.
Yeah. It's not morbid at all because it's not.
Right,
It's just
right.
more whimsical and just like it's just existing because that's what they do. They exist. It's not really morbid.
Right.
It's part of them. And like the log on the bottom is actually a decaying log. But it's beautiful because I find so much beauty when I walk around my forest park and I see just decaying things and things growing on them, like animals living in them. And like, there's always a use for things that are dead in nature. They become whole ecosystems in themselves. And I think that's really beautiful. It's interesting though, as far as the story, the actual story itself, the fantasy story, because I started giving these, I started sharing these pieces, the avant-garde pieces, with people in D&D forums on Reddit, and somebody got back to me
Hmm.
and sent me a 60-page like document of a world that they created. This was for the Rose, the Thorn Blossom Queen, the Rose Queen, and they made a 60-page like mini like part of their campaign of like her garden and what her character is about and like creatures that dwell in her garden and how you appease her, and like it was fascinating, and I thought it was so cool because it sparked somebody's imagination and sparked them to create, and I thought that was because I gave them permission to do so,
Hmm.
and what they came back with was so much more than I could have ever imagined. I really like that collaborative form of storytelling where you play D&D or you insert these characters into your story and bring them to life in your own way. Because the way I would bring them to life is so different than how anybody else would. I just thought that was really fun and cool. I was excited to share that because it was the most amazing thing.
There's nothing more flattering than fan work. When I got the first piece of fan work done for something I'd written, I was over the moon. It's such a good feeling.
It really is.
Um, I have one question to ask each individual now, and I want the audience to formulate their own questions and enter them into chat if they have them for Ginger to kind of curate. But the question now goes to um, we are what we ingest. So the media that we take in eventually formulates us and how we shift and change, etc. And I was going to start with Eric on this one because he, like me, I would hope, it seemed it, a big fan of Deep Space Nine, Star Trek Deep Space Nine. And that was a very big formative force for me, narratively speaking, as I was growing up in high school. So I wanted to talk about what other media properties you have ingested, be it music, dance, art, maybe some theatrics, especially for staging your photography, modeling of yourself, Lauren, that influenced what it is you produce. So, Eric, we'll start with you. What other media have you ingested that influences your artwork?
Well, okay, so oh, comic books, anime, um, techno. I don't listen to anything with lyrics,
Mm,
so jazz, techno, synthwave, all kinds of electronic music, um, movie scores, soundtracks, anything, everything from John Williams to John Powell and Michael Giacchino, all of that stuff. But my brother is a filmmaker.
oh,
He went to school for film, and so he introduced me to the role of a cinematographer, how important cinematography is to filmmaking, to color and composition and all that stuff. And he put me on to the work of a cinematographer named Roger Deakins,
mm-hmm.
who's, if you're not familiar, if people aren't familiar, is responsible for the visual look of Blade Runner 2049
Mm-hmm.
and some like James Bond films, and a number of other movies. But that really had a huge impact on a lot of my recent work, more recent work, more thinking about atmosphere and value and color. But then I've also he also introduced me to uh, what is referred to as bisexual lighting and how that can influence how you light and color dark skin. So you don't have to use local values, browns and yellows and
Mm-hmm.
raw siennas and all that stuff when you're painting that flesh tone. It's, I mean, the darker the skin tone, the more reflective it is. So if you have a darker skinned person in a nightclub or something like that, they're not just going to be brown shades of brown. They're going to be blues and purples, and this is like what I have on my easel right now is another example of that I'm eager to dive into. But um, this the approach of cinematography, the introduction of cinematography, and some of the luminaries in that industry have had a profound impact on how I even compose an illustration now, especially for Magic the Gathering.
Gotcha.
I'm not thinking, and when I talk to my students, I'm not thinking about how can I compose this illustration. I'm thinking about where's the camera in this scene? How is this lit? How can I dramatically portray this character? And I play out the entire art brief as if I'm watching a couple of seconds of a film and I just press pause. And there's my illustration. I don't know. That's how I see it in my head.
Yeah, no, you're making me think of a movie called Belly. I think it was 97. That the lighting really, yeah, if you ever get a chance, check out Belly, Belly. That, your bisexual lightings.
Oh yeah,
As you
That
just,
was full. That movie was full of amazing lighting scenarios.
yeah,
Like, that
yeah,
was,
that's,
yeah, that was a classic. Watched
okay,
that when I was
awesome.
way too
Thank you,
young.
Lauren. Yeah, yeah, well,
Moonlight's another one.
oh yes. Oh yes.
Yeah.
Even the poster of Moonlight is showing off what you're in for.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and there's an article about the lighting of the show Insecure as well, directed by Issa Rae.
Mm,
That's all about, like, she took, like, her lighting director took great care to light dark skin in like the most appealing, flattering way possible, and it's full of bisexual lighting like that. Because they're like, there's so many ways that you can utilize this kind of lighting to really make that skin look so reflective and just gorgeous and dimensional. It's great.
I'm now going to be pondering the sexual prism that is lighting all day. Uh, so, actually, the same question over to you, Bruce. What media do you ingest that has influenced your artwork?
I mean, all of it. I feel like, I always listen to music when I'm working on my art. So, like Eric, that's a major piece of it. In fact, to the point where if some combination of caffeine and music is almost essential. Like if I don't have one of those ingredients, the art just doesn't even happen. Um, um, Aside from that, I read a lot. So there's, my bookcases back there, kind of a sampling of all the things that I've read. I've been inspired a lot by the sci-fi fantasy I grew up reading in like the 80s, 90s, and even the some of the books that maybe don't stand up as well now often had amazing covers by Michael Whalen or Keith Parkinson. Like that's the stuff that I grew up with, and I think that comes through in my work as well. That's definitely a major aspect of the whole thing. But I mean, classic games. I'm going back and replaying games that I grew up playing in like the early '90s. Since my son is now getting old enough that he can enjoy those things, and so I'm re-engaging with the background art in games like Quest for Glory or Kyrandia, or like some of those things. A lot of the younger folks probably have never even heard of some of these, but the art is incredible, and some of it, if you don't know it's out there, right? It's almost forgotten in some ways. So that comes through in my work as well in a major way.
You did the cover art for the Sierra book of Sierra
Yeah,
Online,
there
was
was
it?
like a history of Sierra Online, and I did a cover that was sort of a impressionistic version of Half Dome, because Half Dome was the company's logo, and
Hmm.
it's got like an arc of the game icons that you would have in different games. So like, these were all point and click adventure games for the most part. So you'd have an icon for looking at something and an icon for touching or walking or so on. So yeah, I got to fit in all these little nods to one of my favorite computer game companies in that.
Well, that's interesting that you would wind up staring for so long at a background piece of artwork while interacting in front of it, engaging with it directly. I wonder if that was formulative for how you would approach your own artwork.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I look back at those backgrounds. There was like a sweet spot in the early 90s. Before that was kind of like EGA graphics, where the amount of color palette that the artist had to work with was not sufficient to create a
Mm.
painterly image. And after that, things went to full motion video and then 3D. And so you didn't have painterly type backgrounds as much anymore. But like right around like I don't know, like 91 to 94, there was there were backgrounds that were literally painted like in gouache or poster paint, and then scanned into the computer. So they are a very good representation of the kind of painterly work that many of us revere in the fantasy industry.
Okay, and Lauren, how about you? Oh, you know what? I can guess, but please go ahead. I've seen
Uh,
your Instagram.
oh yeah, for sure. I'm very, very inspired by the idea of I was always very escapist in my own head when I was a kid. I would be like overturning little rocks and finding worlds underneath, like with like all like the bugs that were crawling in the dirt, like worms and little pill bugs and stuff. I was always really interested and inspired by nature, first and foremost. Like I said before, my dad used to do fashion design. I would help him kind of like sort his like costumes in color because he's colorblind, and then like I would help him design some of his outfits that he was making for people around the neighborhood. And so an interest of fashion came very early as well. I'm obviously a huge anime fan. I grew up watching Dragon Ball Z, Pokemon, Sailor Moon, and I just love the idea that you could transform and become a better version of yourself. So a lot of my work is it's kind of like transformative, transcendent, but also immersive because I want people to get kind of lost in the worlds that I have in my own head, and I hope that the work accomplishes that. I was also a huge video game nerd as well. I still am. Grew up on like Mario Party, not Mario Party, the original Mario, Sonic the Hedgehog, Donkey Kong Country. You know, and I love Nintendo a lot. Legend of Zelda. Again, games that you could just escape into this world that's immersive and has its own story and lore. Um, I would read fantasy novels as well. Love fantasy novels. Just tons of different kinds, but things that have their own beautiful world building, their own magic systems, their own lore. Um, Gosh, what else? There's so much. I draw inspiration from like everything that I see around me, though. The things that I consume are indicative of the things I'm interested in, and I try to put those in my work. But yeah, definitely like that magical girl, transformative. Evolving through the power of friendship is always like that's the theme that strikes true to my heart because I just love that so much. And
When you said Sailor Moon, that really hit home.
oh, for sure, for sure. Like it's just a massive influence for me. And as far as music, I love trip hop because trip hop is kind of immersive in itself. It's like it's a genre, it's a subgenre of music that's really interesting. I mean, it stands for trippy hip hop,
Hmm.
but it's like very like minor key tonality is very like driving like beats and everything, like very soothing. But every time I listen to songs of that genre, my mind just goes and wanders and like makes its own scenes of the worlds that I have in my head. And it really helps influence my own work and inspires my own work. Um, and it's just very like it's very I don't know, it's trippy, it's nice. It's you should check it out if you haven't ever heard of the genre of trip
No,
hop.
I haven't heard
Uh,
that. I'll definitely check it out.
Massive Attack or Portishead
Oh,
or
okay.
yeah, that's trip hop.
Okay. Okay,
Yeah.
yeah.
So that's largely. I mean, I have other influences too. Like there's movies. Oh, Miyazaki movies, obviously. That's an easy one.
The whimsy, yeah.
Any Ghibli movie is just going to be great.
Mhm.
Um, Again, like people going to new worlds and getting lost in them is like a very heavy theme in those movies, and that's something I also resonate with, as well as the frequent strong female protagonists that we have that are flawed in every way, but manage to overcome their situations that they're put in. I love stuff like that so much.
Okay, well, we have a few questions in here. Let's see. Are these the two? I have two questions I'm seeing. Okay. So the first one is from an Allie Briggs, and I will let you volunteer who tackles it first. What drives your desire to work as an artist?
I guess I'll go first. World building is probably at the heart of everything that I do. And I think that goes back to childhood, the kinds of ways that I entertain myself. My first foray into art was mostly maps. So that was what I was doing in school, turning over the worksheets and doing maps on the back of them, and then using maps as a way to tell stories about geopolitics and geology and environments and civilizations clashing and all kinds of things like that. And also there was this game that I played sometimes. In the dirt bank behind our house, I would carve out sort of civilizations into the sort of the face. It was like a mini cliff of basically sand dunes, sort of. Um, and also when we were going to national parks and stuff, we were just kind of like making little cabins and ditches and all sorts of things, and imagining what these little people would be doing in these little mini civilizations. So I think that those two influences are probably the most direct impact into my work now. And in a way, like I'm known mostly for landscapes these days. A landscape's really just a map turned on its side. It's a lot of the same type of narrative building, like the same types of tools that you're using to tell a story about a place. Um, so yeah, that would be mine.
Okay. I envision little Bruce playing in the yard, still wearing the hat.
Oh, this was before the hat.
Before that. Eric, how about you? What drives your desire to work as an artist?
I can't imagine doing anything else that wouldn't get me fired.
So you want to be a great accountant? Be
We all have gone through that stage of life where we had to ask ourselves, what do you want to do? What do you want to do when you get older? What do you want to do when you go to college? What's your major going to be? What are you going to do? And I always knew that I liked to draw. It was the one thing I could be in this kind of fugue state where I'm just not aware of the world around me. I can just focus and be happy drawing. You know, when I was in high school, I thought that I wanted to go to college to learn how to do comic books and sequential art. But then I fell in love with the idea of telling a story with a single image, condensing everything down to that one moment and learning, trying to be as good at that as humanly possible or as I can be. But over my career, like I listed off all these different things that I've done, and from video games to working in animation and advertising agencies and all this stuff, it was me chasing money and not really knowing where I wanted to go or not thinking that I could do what I really wanted to do. So I just accepted any old kind of job, but that always led to me being told, you know what, we don't think you want to be here, and we're just gonna let you leave. And I go,
let you pursue other
oh,
opportunities.
gee.
You know,
But yeah. So I absolutely love what I do, and a lot of that comes from my how passionate I am about science fiction and fantasy. I love sci-fi. I've given speeches before where I tell people I knew exactly where I was every Saturday from September of 1987 to July of 1999. I was home watching Star Trek. So, like, there's not many people that know exactly where they were every Saturday. Anyway, but yeah, it's love, it's passion. So yeah,
you can't not do it.
yeah, I can't.
All right, Lauren, same question.
Yeah, for me, I think my art, I mean, when I was a kid, I was compelled as if by a motor to draw. I always had things knocking around in my head, and I would like pace around my room animating the stories that I had, the worlds that I had, and my mom was like super worried about me and everything. Then she got me evaluated, and the doctor told her that I was okay and that she was the one with the problem. So she just left me alone, let me vibe and do art.
Way to go, doctor.
Yeah, your typical neurodivergent art kid is what I was. But I nothing could stop me from being in my sketchbook and just getting whatever was in my head out on paper because there were just so many ideas and so much that I wanted to convey. But what I also realized was that growing up as an introverted kid, I didn't quite know how to meet new people and talk to new people. And so my art started to be really driven by the idea that it could help me communicate with other people. And without telling people anything, I could tell people so much about myself through my art. And so even though I'm not shy anymore and I'm still introverted, but I'm not like, I'm not shut in. I still enjoy doing that. I still enjoy giving a piece of myself to other people and letting them know who I am as a person and what I'm interested in, because art is really a reflection of all the things that you've absorbed in your life experience and the things that you find interesting in your life experience, something that's worth putting on paper. So that's largely what my art is driven by now. It's like it's a desire to communicate, but also to try to make people feel a little bit like how I felt growing up and experiencing things like Sailor Moon or certain video games for the first time ever, where they got so inspired that it felt like it lit up their brain and just made them want to create more. I'm like, if I can do that, like a fraction of like what I felt as a child with my art to anybody else, then I'll have done what I set out to do. So yeah, communicating with other people, but also just like first and foremost, just getting my brain out on paper and just like being like, hey, I want to tell something that I've experienced, and like maybe it might hit somebody in the right way and help them, feel good about themselves or see themselves in my art or just escape for a little bit or just makes them smile. but it's you know, communication is what art is really all about. It's just like you're conveying an idea, and I'm so fascinated by that and so in love with that. And I also, it's very hard to imagine being anything else, but an artist, because I was just this weird kid who couldn't do anything else but art, and I was allowed to vibe and continue to do it, which was great.
Yeah, Spore Crowned Queen was a great handshake.
That makes me really
Absolutely.
happy to hear.
Yeah, no, it was wonderful. I've got two more questions I'm going to go through. Um, Tamila, Tamila is asking, what are the most important skills for someone in your line of work? So I am going to tackle Bruce to start with on this one.
Okay. Business skills, negotiation. I feel like those kinds of things are not what draw us into this line of work at all, but it's the kind of stuff you need to know in order to make it pay for itself and make it more sustainable. I mean, anytime you're dealing with clients, there's an aspect of negotiation to it. And to be fair, like something like Wizards of the Coast, that aspect is sort of streamlined. They have like a very de facto approach to most of this stuff that applies to everyone. So, you know, you're probably not jumping in with that sort of client right off the bat, though. You're probably dealing with a lot of more small bore clients that in many cases aren't necessarily that professional and don't really know what they're doing when it comes to writing contracts, negotiating stuff. Oftentimes they'll be like, okay, you write the contract and we'll take a look and make sure there's nothing in there that we don't like. So being able to talk about that stuff and not running away from it, as many of us would perhaps like to do initially, really pays off um, down the line. And as far as like business development, business skills, like being able to think strategically about you know, if you're making products like prints, playmats, pins, you know, whatever it happens to be, like thinking about the costs and where you're sourcing it, and um, how your pricing strategy is going to work if you're going to a convention. I would say that anyone wanting this career would do well to probably take some business courses, read some books on the subject matter, definitely go go ask questions of professional illustrators and artists, and you know, email them, see if they're willing to answer any questions along those lines, so that you have a little bit of an idea how to handle that aspect of it, because it makes everything else possible.
Okay. All right. Eric, same question.
Well, on top of everything that Bruce just said, businesses, that's super important. Um, just for the from the artist point of view, um, you got to be easy to work with. There's a lot of really talented people out there that can't take direction or refuse to take direction. And uh, at the end of the day, like I said, we are being hired to create a visual for somebody else's words. You know, we have to give the client what they want. So being easy to work with is super important. But also being passionate about what you're creating. It's one thing to have an art job. It's another thing to want to show up to do that art job and not just think of it like bagging groceries. If it's miserable, find something else to do. Um, and I think lastly, probably the most important thing is perseverance. Like, this does not happen overnight for 99% of the people that want to do this as a
Mm-hmm.
career. They're going to have day jobs. They're going to be frustrated. They're going to have their parents, their relatives. You find a job yet? You went to school for 4 years. You ain't found a job yet? What are you going to do? What are you going to do? Why don't you join the army? Perseverance. Because there's so many people after they get out of whatever atelier or online school or university, that give up within that first 4 years after graduation because of exterior pressure. And before they know it, they settle into that accounting job with their dad, or whatever that other career path might be, and then they get comfortable, and then that thing that they were passionate about becomes a Saturday hobby. So, not that there's anything wrong with that, but if this is what you want, perseverance.
Took my answer, Eric. I was going to say perseverance. Well, it's because we just recorded an episode about it too. It's like, with the industry being the way it is right now, it's a huge topic. But also adaptability is a huge one. The ability, because, as far as for me, especially if you're going to be a studio artist, working full time, or, I mean, even independent or freelance, you never know when the work is going to dry up or the rug can be pulled out from under you. And to be able to adapt and to pivot and change your fortunes from being the starving artist to actually being successful, no matter what situation gets thrown at you, is a huge skill that I feel like a lot of people haven't quite developed. Like, people tend to panic when things go wrong. But if you have made plans for things to go wrong, just in case, and you make backups for yourself, you make contingencies for yourself, that's a really, really important thing to have as an artist, to be able to handle most situations that are thrown at you, because all the situations will be thrown at you when you're an artist, because you just never know how predictable or unpredictable your life can become. And it's good to be able to learn how to roll with the punches, learn how to roll when a client is giving you all the feedback, learn how to adapt when this job that you really were banking everything on dries up. All of that is going to be really important. I strongly co-sign every single thing that Eric and Bruce has already said, so I'm not going to repeat it. But I think that adaptability is definitely a huge thing that I've had to personally learn, that's kept me afloat for these years that I've done my career.
Yeah. I just to follow up with what Lauren had just said, if there's a lot of illustrators out there that become good at that one thing. I'm the master of hands, I'm the master of dragons, I'm the master of this. But then if that one company or those companies that you were doing that for stop calling you, you have nothing else in your portfolio, nothing else in your arsenal, that's where the real tension and the real stress comes in. It's like, oh my God, what am I going to do? So I tell students sometimes, have multiple skill sets, learn some 3D, try dabbling in different styles, show that you are adaptable, so that if a job comes up, you can say, yeah, I could do that. I can apply for that. Wow, it pays this much. Oh, I could totally do that. Rather than, oh my God, fire. Where are the dragon jobs? So that's just my point of view.
Along those lines, I would say I've always felt it's very important to have multiple types of income streams, or at least to explore multiple types of income streams. I like to think of it as like a stool. You want multiple legs on that stool. Something comes along and cuts one of them out. Like, I had 14 conventions planned for 2020, and then suddenly there are none, but fully pivoted to freelance shortly thereafter, and had my best year yet in my career at that point. Like, all sorts of things can happen. Obviously, we're having a huge industry changeover with the introduction of AI and stuff. So having different ways to monetize what you want to do with your art allows you to take a different path. The door closes, the window opens. You have multiple methods of egress.
And that is a good segue into our last question. And this one I think is going to be very pertinent for a lot of listeners. What was your first art-related job, and what did you learn and improve since then? Especially as it pertains to your first art-related job. And for this one, I'll start with Lauren.
My first my first actual art job, my first studio job,
Hmm.
was an animation studio here in Atlanta called Floyd County Productions. And I got this job because I had just graduated from grad school at Savannah College of Art and Design and decided to stay in Georgia and put my art everywhere online, like freelance websites and stuff like that, and just trying to get something. I had no idea where my career was going to go at that point. But somebody from that studio had emailed me and said, "Hey, I saw your portfolio and I saw that you're located in Georgia. Would you like to take an art test for us?"
Mm.
And took the art test, got in, and moved over to Atlanta, Georgia, and worked on various TV shows such as Archer and Always Sunny in Philadelphia and The League, things for FX, because that's what the studio specialized in. So it was very, very cool. Um,
Archer?
yeah, I worked on Archer. I have an Emmy working on Archer. It's pretty. I'm surprised you didn't know
I
that.
had no idea.
I
No
knew. Come
idea.
on.
I don't know how I missed your IMDb. I'm sorry.
I am on IMDb. Yeah, but so I worked on in that studio, and I learned a lot from it because even though the work was really fun, I loved the people who were there. Oftentimes, they would have us working up to 80 hours a week. There was no real work-life balance. I would be at the studio from like 8 a.m. to 1 a.m. Just like constantly grinding over and over again. I had no sense of self-advocacy. I had no sense of that like I deserved anything more than that, that I deserved any more pay. And I also learned a lot about how to lead a team based on examples that I saw how I didn't want to run anything ever. There were a lot of people who just had no training and who just didn't know how to communicate their ideas and didn't know how to accurately speak about what they wanted and didn't know how to treat others. And after I became a leader, once I left and went to the game industry, I basically fashioned off of everything I didn't want to be, and and learned a lot about that. But also, I learned how to negotiate. I learned how to set up proper boundaries and say, no, I'm not willing to work these kinds of hours. How do we negotiate something better instead? I learned how to advocate for myself heavily because I didn't really have much of a voice when I was at Floyd because I was afraid of getting pushed out because I watched most strong women who are outspoken get pushed out of the studio slowly but surely, and I didn't want to be one of those people. But as I moved to other studios, I was like, well, no, actually, my voice is a pretty valuable thing, and I would like to continue to use it because that's the only way that people know what you actually need. And so once I was able to do that, my career really started to take off, and I found ways to lead, to have values to lead my career by, and it was modeled off of a lot of things I didn't want to see. So yeah, better work-life balance, better advocacy, and better self outlook and respect.
Okay. Okay. Next up, Eric.
My first art job was right out of college, like the week after graduation. I ended up working for a fine artist in New York City named Jeff Koons.
Hmm.
Um, and I was there for almost a year, um, painting murals and um, doing like really a lot anything that they needed, really. But the job um, was right up my alley because the way I was taught how to paint is a very methodical way of going about it. All of my colors are pre-mixed according to value and everything. So when I got the job, I could just hit the ground running, and we basically had to paint Jeff's idea. Like Jeff would come in with a 8 by 10 glossy of his collaged image, and we would have to transfer that image to a canvas, a giant 20-foot canvas. But we had to pre-mix all of the colors from his composition, his little photocopy composition, and we had to tube paint, and we had to train our eye to see color and value um, rapidly, and in order to adjust on the fly and change colors and things like that on the murals. But uh, that experience gave me the understanding that oil painting is more like cooking than anything. The right ingredients, the right recipe gives you the right colors, and that gives you the right result. You know, too much phthalo ruins the ruins the meal. But yeah, that was an interesting experience, and I still use a lot of the techniques and process that I learned from that job today. So
Sorry, I was muted. I like how deep that cooking analogy goes. Especially for the appropriate time for certain dishes. It might be the right dish, but maybe not the right time, etc. That's
right.
I'll ruminate on that one for a while. Also, I'm hungry.
You think of saturation, think of saturation in a painting like sugar,
Yeah,
Mm.
it
right?
could be definitely too much. Has to be a nice
Too
balance.
much.
And sometimes you just don't have a sweet tooth. You want something more sour.
Exactly. And then that saturated palette doesn't work for a macabre, you know, image like a Brahm. Brahm's not saturated. Brahm knows the exact amount of sugar and salt to put into that meal.
That he does.
That's
Oh,
satisfying.
well, we know what Lauren's cooking with mushrooms.
I was actually wondering about the flavor profile of my illustrations. And I was curious about it.
shiitake.
I think it's a little sweet.
Lots
a little
of
sweet, a
lots of
little creamy.
umami.
Yeah, lots of umami, but like probably more sugar and cream than anything else, which is my flavor profile anyway.
Okay, and Bruce, your first job.
Let's see. First proper job that I got paid for was like just a freelance gig while I was still working as an ESL teacher in Seattle. One of my students was a Turkish guy who was learning English, and he knew that I had an interest in Turkey because I'd done a semester abroad in college there. And he was involved with the local Turkish film festival. So they hired me to do an illustration, a poster illustration for the Seattle Turkish Film Festival. And it was actually pretty great. But I guess the two things that I learned, one, I charged $400 for that illustration. I definitely charge more than that now. But at the time, I was very satisfied. I was like, wow, this is great. This is like 20 hours of work at $20, you know, like that sounds pretty good to me at that point. And so I was happy they went for it. I didn't think that there was, you know, potentially much more money on the table. The other thing that I really learned with that one, because I I followed a very standard illustration process of like thumbnails, color comps, roughs, and so forth, is that especially when you're dealing with art directors or just, you know, clients who are not artists themselves, there are portions of the process that you reserve like direction for yourself as the artist, shorthand for the artist, and ones that are intended for other people to view, because I showed them my page of like 20 thumbnails or whatever, super rough, super graphic, abstract almost, and they didn't know what to do with that. They had no idea what was going on. And so I chose my favorites of those, and then built those up to proper like rough sketches, and then they had a better idea of, you know, what we were cooking with. And so I've kind of retained that, and that, you know, I may often still have that kind of process of thumbnails to roughs to color comps and so on. But depending on the client, some of that stuff is for you, for helping you sort out your head, and some of that is for the client.
So sticking with Eric's analogy, you don't want to show the client how that sausage is getting made.
Right. Something along those lines. Some aspects of the process might be too elemental to really let someone have a taste of these couple ingredients, and
Yeah.
they can't extrapolate to what the finished dish is going to taste like.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you all so much. This it was great just getting the three of you together. It has been delightful interviewing the three juggernauts that you guys are. So I want to make sure that you each get a send off, but talk about a project that you are working on now, or that you have recently worked on, or one that you just feel needs more attention in your history. Um, we have all of your social medias and material and all of your links in our chat, as well as going to be. Oh, and my wife has closing slides. But it is very important that you guys get to give a shout out to whatever you wish that means a lot to you right now artistically. So we'll start with our departure with Bruce.
Sure. So aside from finding me on www.brucebrenneise.com, and my name is very unique, so you can find me on whatever social medias you want just by using that to hunt me down. I guess other than that, I'd say maybe check out my Patreon. That's where I'm keeping my personal my personal story, my personal world building called the 12 Continents alive. And I guess the more people show an interest in that, then maybe the more I can also encourage myself to cut time out of my schedule of mostly doing stuff for Wizards, and segue more and more into personal work. You know.
Okay. And Eric?
So, I'm doing stuff for a client that I can't talk about and on a project that I can't talk about, but
Yeah.
It sounds great.
2027 is going to be lit. So that's about all I can say right there. But I also have a Patreon that I have recently dusted off. I haven't posted anything to it because I started it in 2018 and then life
Oh, did it?
changed. So I didn't really do anything, but I am going to be posting progress images of the painting I'm working on now, and that the road of me exploring realist Afrofuturistic paintings is going to be where that lives. Otherwise, you can follow me on Instagram. Smash that follow button. I got to get my followers. Gotta,
Just be on Twitch.
all right.
Play Roblox while you're
Yeah. But yeah, that's it. That's it.
Okay. And Lauren.
I'm not going to plug any of my personal projects because I'm not going to promise things that I don't know if I can finish or not. But what I do like to plug is, as always, the podcast, even though I know we talked about it already. Seriously, if you're interested in conversations like this, please check out the Painted in Color podcast on YouTube. It's youtube.com/c/painted in color. You know, me, Eric, and our other wonderful co-host, Mia Araujo. We've done this podcast since 2020, and we're very proud of the work that we've done. Like between three very busy artists, we were able to just like have conversations and have people on and celebrate marginalized people in the industry as well, which was a huge deal for each of us to be able to represent. So very proud of that podcast. Go check it out if you're interested. And otherwise, follow me on all socials at LAB Illustration. Unlike Bruce, my name is very common and very difficult to find. So if you look up Lab Illustration, then you'll be able to find me pretty much anywhere. But you know, Patreon, Etsy, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, all that stuff. I'm there. So check out my work. I don't post very often, but hopefully you enjoy it anyway.
And Ginger will take us out.
I'm gonna thank you for joining us. This was recorded. I'm about to hit the stop recording button. But if you want to find the Prince William Public Library, many thanks. I forgot to mention at the beginning of the program to the Friends of the Chin Park Regional Library. They funded this program in its entirety. Thank you all for joining us tonight. The library's socials are pwcva.gov/library. You can find us there. Our YouTube, this will be on our YouTube channel in the next couple of days as soon as our lovely, fantastic web person throws some branding on it and gets it onto our web. There we go. There's everybody's slides, including Lauren and Eric's podcast. Huge shout out to our moderator, who, granted, is my husband, but did this for basically the promise of some brownies. Unlike the rest of y'all, William is a science fiction, fantasy fiction author. You can find him at williamljgalini.com, and everyone else is here as well. Thank you so much for joining us tonight.